The summer heat pressed down on Oak Ridge like a heavy blanket, the kind of heat that made tempers flare and patience wear thin. The weatherman had called it the hottest day of the year, and nobody who stepped outside would argue with that assessment. Officer James Mercer wiped sweat from his forehead as he sat in his patrol car, the air conditioning struggling to keep up. 12 years on the force had taught him many things, but dealing with the summer heat in a polyester uniform wasn't one of them. He took a long drink from his water bottle, then set it in the cup holder before starting his engine. All units be advised of potential traffic congestion near Franklin Street Market. Large gathering reported for community voter registration event, came the voice over his radio. Mercer sighed. Another day, another crowd to manage. He'd been with the Oak Ridge Police Department long enough to know the shortcuts and back roads, so he arrived at the market parking lot before any other officers. The crowd wasn't as large as dispatch had made it sound. Maybe 30 people gathered around several folding tables set up near the store entrance. Colorful signs about voter registration and community involvement hung from the tables, fluttering slightly in the hot breeze. His eyes narrowed when he spotted who was running the event. Tanya Wilson. The woman had been a thorn in his side for years, always organizing one thing or another, always watching him with those knowing eyes when he patrolled her neighborhood. There had been complaints about his conduct over the years, 13 of them to be exact, and he had a feeling she was behind at least a few. Mercer adjusted his belt and approached the tables. The crowd parted slightly, conversations quieting as people noticed his uniform. Tanya looked up from the clipboard she was holding, her expression carefully neutral. "Afternoon, officer," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the hustle and bustle of the grocery store behind her. She wore her hair in neat braids pinned back from her face. A blue t-shirt with "Your Voice Matters" printed across the front was tucked into khaki pants. "Ms. Wilson," Mercer replied, making no attempt to hide the chill in his voice. "Got a complaint about your group blocking the entrance." This was a lie. There had been no complaint. But Mercer had found that starting conversations this way gave him the upper hand. Tanya gestured to the clear pathway they'd left to the store doors. "As you can see, we're well within code. We have our permit right here." She reached for a laminated document lying on the table. "I'll need to see some ID as well," Mercer said, ignoring the permit. A few people nearby exchanged glances. Everyone knew Tanya. She'd lived in Oak Ridge her whole life, had graduated from the local high school 20 years ago, and had been organizing community events for nearly as long. "May I ask why you need my ID for a properly permitted event?" Tanya asked, her voice still calm but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "We've held registration drives here 6 times this year alone." Mercer felt his jaw tighten. This was how it always went with her. Never an outright refusal. Always these polite questions that somehow made him look bad. "Standard procedure," he said through clenched teeth. "Is it standard procedure for all community events, Officer Mercer?" she asked, her eyes never leaving his face. "Or just the ones I organize?" The heat seemed to intensify around them. Mercer was aware of the growing number of eyes on this interaction. A teenage boy nearby had already pulled out his phone, though whether he was texting or recording wasn't clear. "You folks need to move these tables back another 10 feet, Mercer said, changing tactics. "Fire code. The fire code requires a minimum clearance of 6 feet from any entrance," Tanya replied evenly. "We're currently 12 feet back as specified in our permit, which was approved by Fire Chief Rodriguez himself." Mercer felt heat rising in his face that had nothing to do with the sun beating down on his dark uniform. He'd come over to flex a little authority, maybe make Tanya and her do-gooders uncomfortable enough that they'd pack up early. Instead, she was quoting regulations back to him, making him look foolish. "Is there a problem here?" A heavy-set man in his 60s approached, introducing himself as the store manager. "Ms. Wilson and her group have permission to be here. They're good for business, actually. People come to register, then do their shopping." Mercer's hand tightened around his water bottle. He'd dealt with difficult people before, but something about Tanya Wilson got under his skin like nobody else. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like she could see right through his badge to the insecure man beneath. "We've received noise complaints," Mercer lied again, doubling down. "From whom?" Tanya asked, crossing her arms. "We've been playing no music using no megaphones. Just having conversations with interested citizens about their right to vote." A small crowd had formed now, watching the exchange. Mercer spotted Mrs. Chen from the bakery, Dr. Thompson, who had treated his sprained wrist last year, and several other faces he recognized from around town. "You know what your problem is, Miss Wilson?" Mercer said, stepping closer, his voice dropping. "You don't know when to just shut up and do what you're told." A ripple went through the onlookers. The teenage boy was definitely recording now, his phone held up without any attempt to hide it. "And you know what your problem is, Officer Mercer?" Tanya replied, not backing down an inch. "You think a badge gives you the right to harass citizens who are exercising their constitutional rights." The words hung in the air between them. Mercer felt something snap inside him, a dam of frustration that had been building for years. Without thinking, he unscrewed his water bottle and in one fluid motion, upended it over Tanya's head. Water cascaded over her braids, down her face, soaking the front of her blue t-shirt. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was water dripping from Tanya's chin onto the sun-baked pavement. Then chaos erupted. "Did you see that? He just assaulted her." "Somebody call 911. "I got it all on video." Phones were out everywhere now, recording the aftermath. Tanya stood perfectly still, water dripping from her clothes. Her expression a mixture of shock and something else, a determination that made Mercer's stomach knot. "Officer James Mercer," she said clearly, making sure everyone heard his name. "You just assaulted a citizen exercising her First Amendment rights in front of at least 20 witnesses." Mercer knew he'd made a terrible mistake the moment the water left the bottle, but hearing her say it out loud made reality come crashing down. His radio crackled to life, another unit responding to the scene. Someone in the crowd was already on the phone with dispatch describing what had happened. "You think you're untouchable," Tanya continued, her voice steady despite her dripping clothes. "Let's see if that holds up this time." A younger woman rushed forward with napkins from the coffee stand inside the store, trying to help Tanya dry off. But Tanya waved her away, never taking her eyes off the officer. "You've had 13 complaints of excessive force and racial bias filed against you in the past 5 years, she said. "Did you think nobody was keeping track?" The store manager stepped between them. "I think you should leave now, officer. We have security cameras covering this entire area, and I'll be making sure that footage is preserved." Mercer's radio crackled again. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. Captain Reynolds is requesting your immediate response. Code 6. Code 6, report to superior officer immediately." Mercer felt cold despite the heat. The crowd around them had grown larger. People were coming out of the store to see what the commotion was about. More phones were recording. Someone had started a live stream. "Did you know," Tanya said, her voice carrying clearly despite the growing noise, "that assaulting a voter registration volunteer is a federal offense?" Mercer hadn't known that. He wasn't sure if it was even true, but the confidence with which she said it made his mouth go dry. "Officer Mercer," came a new voice. An older black woman had pushed through the crowd. "I'm Dr. Elaine Wilson, County Health Commissioner. That young woman you just assaulted is my daughter, and I just got off the phone with my son-in-law, District Attorney Paul Turner." Mercer felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He knew Dr. Wilson by reputation, a powerful figure in county government. And if Tanya was married to the DA, his radio squawked again, more urgently this time. "Unit 47, acknowledge immediately. Captain Reynolds and Chief Garcia are en route to your location." The chief himself was coming. In 12 years, Mercer had never known the chief to come to a scene unless something had gone very, very wrong. Tanya stood tall despite her wet clothes, surrounded by supporters, phones recording from every angle. In that moment, Mercer realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his career. And judging by the look in Tanya's eyes, the consequences were just beginning. What he didn't know yet was that in exactly 5 minutes and 24 seconds, those consequences would bring him to his knees. The next 60 seconds seemed to stretch into hours for everyone in the grocery store parking lot. Water still dripped from Tanya's clothes onto the hot pavement, evaporating almost as quickly as it hit the ground. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people now, a mix of shoppers, community members, and employees on break who had heard something was happening outside. Among them was 16-year-old Andre Jackson, who had only stopped by the market to pick up soda for his mom. When he saw Officer Mercer approach the voter registration table, something told him to stay and watch. Growing up in Oak Ridge, Andre had heard stories about this particular officer. His older brother had been pulled over 3 times in 1 month by Mercer, Never with a ticket, just routine checks that somehow only seemed routine for certain drivers. So when Andre saw Mercer's face getting redder by the second, as he argued with Tanya Wilson, he'd pulled out his phone and hit record. He couldn't have known he was about to capture a moment that would change his community forever. Everyone saw that, Andre called out, his voice cracking slightly with the mix of anger and adrenaline coursing through him. I got it all right here. He held his phone higher, making sure Officer Mercer saw that he was being recorded. Several adults around him nodded in approval, some pulling out their own phones to do the same. Officer Mercer's hand instinctively moved toward Andre, as if to confiscate the phone, but he froze mid-motion. Too many witnesses, too many cameras. The damage was done. Send that video to everyone, an older man in the crowd advised Andre. Back it up right now before anything happens to your phone. Andre nodded, his fingers flying across his screen as he texted the video to his mother, his brother, and uploaded it to 3 different social media platforms. Within seconds, the notifications started rolling in. People were sharing it, tagging the police department, tagging news outlets. Tanya, still dripping but composed, turned to address the growing crowd. I want everyone to remember what happened here today, she said, her voice steady. This is what we've been talking about for years. This is why registering to vote matters. This is why showing up matters. She gestured to the tables behind her where the voter registration forms lay waiting. Who's ready to make their voice heard now? A line began to form instantly, people stepping forward to fill out registration forms. It was as if Mercer's act of aggression had awakened something in the community. A determination that had been simmering for years, now boiling over. Mercer's radio squawked again. Unit 47, acknowledge immediately. He finally reached for it, his hand visibly shaking. Unit 47 responding. Stand by at your location. Do not engage further. Repeat, do not engage. The store manager, a man named Ray Patel who had owned the market for over 20 years, stepped forward again. Officer, I think it's best if you wait in your vehicle until your superiors arrive, he suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a suggestion. For once, Mercer didn't argue. He turned and walked back to his patrol car, the crowd parting silently to let him through, dozens of phone cameras following his retreat. He sat in the driver's seat but didn't close the door, perhaps afraid that doing so would make him look guilty. As if dumping water on a citizen wasn't evidence enough. Back at the registration tables, Dr. Elaine Wilson was helping her daughter dry off with paper towels from the store. Despite her professional title and position as county health commissioner, the look on her face was pure mama bear, a mixture of protective fury and pride in her daughter's composure. You okay, baby? She asked softly, dabbing at Tanya's face. I'm fine, Mom, Tanya replied, though her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off. I just never thought he'd do something so stupid in broad daylight in front of witnesses. Men like that think they're untouchable, Dr. Wilson said, her voice low. They've gotten away with so much for so long that they forget there are consequences. Andre approached them hesitantly, his phone still in hand. Ms. Wilson? I sent the video to the news. Channel 7 just texted back. They want to know if they can use it on the evening broadcast. Tanya smiled at him. Thank you for having the courage to record that, Andre. Yes, tell them they can use it. Tell everyone they can use it. The whole world needs to see what happened here today. The teenager nodded earnestly. My brother got pulled over by that officer 3 times for no reason. Made him late for work once and he almost lost his job. I know, Tanya said gently. He's done the same to a lot of people in our community. Did your brother file a complaint? Andre shook his head. Said it wouldn't make any difference. Well, after today, I think things might start making a difference, Tanya told him. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder. Not just one vehicle, but several, by the sound of it. Officer Mercer stood up beside his patrol car, straightening his uniform, trying to regain some semblance of authority. The first to arrive was Captain Reynolds, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, who had climbed the ranks through hard work and zero tolerance for misconduct. She barely glanced at Mercer as she got out of her car, heading straight for Tanya and Dr. Wilson instead. Ms. Wilson, Dr. Wilson. She greeted them with a respectful nod. I've been briefed on what happened. I want you to know that this department does not condone Officer Mercer's actions in any way. With all due respect, "Captain," Dr. Wilson replied, "your department has received 13 formal complaints about that officer over the past 5 years. Each time, the investigation found insufficient evidence or no wrongdoing. So you'll forgive me if I find it hard to believe that you don't condone his actions." Captain Reynolds didn't flinch at the accusation. "You're right. We've failed this community. But I promise you that changes today." 2 more police vehicles pulled into the parking lot, followed by an unmarked black SUV. Chief Garcia, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, who had been appointed just 6 months ago after the previous chief's retirement, stepped out of the SUV. His face was grim as he surveyed the scene. The store's security officer approached him, tablet in hand. "Chief, we've already pulled the security footage. Would you like to see it now?" Chief Garcia nodded. "Please." The security officer handed him the tablet. The chief watched the footage, his expression darkening. When he finished, he handed the tablet back and walked directly to where Captain Reynolds stood with Tanya and her mother. "Ms. Wilson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Chief Garcia. First, let me apologize on behalf of the entire department for what you experienced today. There is absolutely no excuse for Officer Mercer's behavior." "Thank you, Chief," Tanya replied, shaking his hand. "But I'd prefer actions over apologies." "You'll have both," he assured her. "I've reviewed the security footage. Combined with the witness statements and videos, we have more than enough evidence to take immediate action." He turned to face the crowd, which had grown even larger as word spread through the community. "May I have your attention?" "Please," he called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "I want to address what happened here today." The murmurs quieted as people turned to listen. "What Officer Mercer did today was assault, plain and simple," Chief Garcia stated firmly. "It was unprofessional, unacceptable, and unlawful. As of this moment, he is suspended without pay pending a full investigation, which I will personally oversee." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. In Oak Ridge, officers were rarely suspended, even with pay. "Furthermore," the chief continued, "I will be requesting that the district attorney's office appoint a special prosecutor to review this case, along with all previous complaints against Officer Mercer, to determine if criminal charges are warranted." Tanya exchanged a glance with her mother. This was more than either of them had expected. Meanwhile, Officer Mercer stood by his patrol car, the color draining from his face as he listened to the chief's words. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't going to blow over. This wasn't going to be buried in paperwork or dismissed in a closed-door meeting. He had crossed a line, and for the first time in his career, he was going to face real consequences. "Officer Mercer," Chief Garcia called out, turning to face him. "Please surrender your badge and service weapon to Captain Reynolds immediately." A hush fell over the parking lot. Even the birds seemed to go quiet, as if they too understood the significance of what was happening. Mercer stood frozen, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his badge. For a moment it seemed he might refuse. Then, slowly, he unclipped his badge and walked toward Captain Reynolds, each step heavier than the last. As he handed over his badge and then his gun, a cheer erupted from the crowd. 12 years of unchecked power was ending before their eyes. And somewhere in that crowd, young Andre Jackson was still recording, capturing a moment of accountability that would soon be viewed by millions. What had started as a simple trip to buy soda had turned into something much bigger. A turning point not just for Officer Mercer and Tanya Wilson, but for the entire community of Oak Ridge. What no one knew yet was that in the next 4 minutes, things would take an even more dramatic turn. The shock of seeing Officer Mercer surrender his badge and gun rippled through the crowd. Parents pulled their children closer, wanting them to witness this moment of accountability. Elderly community members who had lived through decades of similar incidents, most without consequences, wiped tears from their eyes. For many in Oak Ridge, this was more than just a badge being taken away. It was the first crack in a system that had seemed impenetrable. But the most surprised person in that parking lot might have been Officer Mercer himself. In 12 years of pushing boundaries, of walking the line between aggressive policing and misconduct, he had never faced any serious repercussions. Warnings, sure. A note in his file here and there. Once he'd been assigned to desk duty for a week after a complaint that couldn't be entirely ignored. But nothing like this. As Captain Reynolds secured his badge and weapon, A sleek black car pulled into the parking lot, tires crunching over the hot asphalt. The crowd parted as a tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, his face set in a grim expression that meant, "Business, that's District Attorney Turner, someone," whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Paul Turner, Tanya's husband, and one of the youngest district attorneys in state history, moved with purpose toward his wife and mother-in-law. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Tanya's still damp clothes, but he maintained his professional demeanor as he greeted Chief Garcia with a firm handshake. "Chief, I came as soon as I heard," he said, his deep voice carrying across the now hushed parking lot. "I understand one of your officers assaulted my wife during a lawful voter registration drive." The word assaulted hung in the air, not splashed or got wet or any of the minimizing terms that might have been used in the past. Assault, a crime with legal consequences, yes, sir, Chief Garcia confirmed. "We're handling it as we speak. Officer Mercer has been suspended pending investigation, and I've already requested a special prosecutor be appointed to avoid any conflict of interest. Given your relationship to Ms. Wilson," Turner nodded approvingly. "Good, I've already called Judge Montgomery, and she's agreed to oversee the case personally." At the mention of Judge Montgomery, known throughout the county for her strict interpretations of police conduct regulations, Mercer visibly paled. Things were moving faster than he could process. Just 15 minutes ago, he'd been an officer with authority and power. Now he stood in limbo, watching his career and possibly his freedom slipping away with each passing second. Meanwhile, Andre Jackson had gone from recording the incident to interviewing witnesses. His initial video had already been shared thousands of times, and his social media followers had jumped from a few hundred friends to over 10,000 in less than half an hour. Sensing an opportunity to document something important, he moved through the crowd with newfound purpose. "Can you tell me what you saw?" he asked an elderly woman who had been near the registration table when everything happened. "I saw that officer lose his temper when Ms. Wilson wouldn't be bullied," she replied, her voice shaking with emotion. "Been shopping at this market for 30 years and I never thought I'd see such a thing. But I'm not surprised it was him. My grandson got stopped by that officer 3 times in 1 month just for driving his new car." Andre nodded, having heard similar stories from others. "And now?" he asked, gesturing to the scene unfolding before them. The woman smiled, wrinkles deepening around her eyes. "Now, young man, we're seeing something that's been a long time coming. We're seeing justice start to work the way it's supposed to." As Andre continued gathering testimonials, Tanya had moved away from the officials to speak with the growing line of people waiting to register to vote. Despite her damp clothes and the chaos around her, she remained focused on the original purpose of the day. "What happened to me today has been happening to people in our community for years," she told them, her voice strong and clear. "The difference is that today we have it on video. Today we have witnesses who refuse to look away. Today we have leaders who are finally listening." She gestured to the registration forms on the table. "This is how we make lasting change, not just through one moment of accountability, but through consistent civic engagement, through voting for leaders who represent our values, through running for office ourselves if necessary." The line grew longer as she spoke, people who had come to shop for groceries now stepping up to register, moved by what they had witnessed and Tanya's words. Back at the cluster of officials, things were taking another turn. A woman in a sharp business suit had arrived, introducing herself as Lisa Chen from the mayor's office. "The mayor is deeply concerned about what happened here today," she informed Chief Garcia and DA Turner. "She's called an emergency press conference for 5 p.m. and would like all parties involved to attend." Turner glanced at his watch. "That's in less than 2 hours." "Yes," Chen confirmed. "This situation is moving quickly. Videos are already viral on multiple platforms. National news outlets are picking up the story. The mayor wants to get ahead of this and demonstrate that Oak Ridge takes police accountability seriously." As these arrangements were being made, Officer Mercer stood off to the side, increasingly aware of how quickly control of the situation had slipped away from him. Captain Reynolds approached him, her expression unreadable. "You'll need to provide a formal statement," she informed him. "I suggest you contact the union rep and get legal counsel immediately." Mercer nodded numbly, his mind racing. "This is all happening so fast," he muttered, more to himself than to his superior. "It was just water." Captain Reynolds fixed him with a cold stare. "No, Mercer. It wasn't just water. It was assault while in uniform. It was abuse of power. It was the last in a long line of incidents that should have been addressed years ago. She lowered her voice so only he could hear. And between you and me, it was career suicide. You're done in law enforcement. The best you can hope for now is to avoid criminal charges. The captain's words hit Mercer like a physical blow. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. His mind flashed to his mortgage, his car payments, his kids' college fund. Everything he had built over 12 years was crumbling, and for what? A moment of anger. A water bottle? Across the parking lot, another development was unfolding. Dr. Wilson was on her phone, her expression changing from concern to surprise as she listened to the caller. Yes, Governor, she's right here, she said, causing those nearby to turn in shock. Dr. Wilson covered the phone and whispered to her daughter, "It's the governor. She wants to speak with you." Tanya's eyes widened as she took the phone. "Hello? Yes, Governor, this is Tanya Wilson." She listened for a moment, her face registering surprise and then determination. "I appreciate that, Governor. Yes, I understand the significance. Yes, I'm willing to do that. Thank you for your support." When she handed the phone back to her mother, the small group around her husband, mother, Chief Garcia, and the mayor's aide, looked at her expectantly. "The governor has been following the situation," Tanya explained, still processing the conversation herself. "She's appointed a special task force to investigate not just today's incident, but the entire pattern of complaints against Officer Mercer and the department's handling of those complaints." Paul Turner placed a supportive hand on his wife's shoulder. "That's significant. A gubernatorial task force has subpoena power and resources that go beyond local jurisdiction. There's more," Tanya continued. "She's asked me to serve as a civilian advisor to the task force given my background in community organizing and, well, my first-hand experience with the issue. The implications of this development weren't lost on anyone present. What had started as a confrontation in a grocery store parking lot was now escalating to the state level, drawing attention from the highest office in the state government. Meanwhile, Officer Mercer watched this unfolding from his increasingly isolated position by the patrol cars. The woman he had tried to intimidate, the woman whose dignity he had tried to strip away with a bottle of water, was now speaking with the governor and being appointed to a task force that would likely determine his fate. His phone vibrated in his pocket. When he checked it, he saw dozens of notifications, messages from fellow officers watching the videos that were now circulating, texts from family members asking what was happening, emails from the police union. One text from his wife simply read, "What have you done? It's all over the news." As the shock of everything began to wear off, a new emotion took hold of Officer Mercer. Fear. Real gut-wrenching fear about what the next hours, days, and weeks would bring. Not just professional consequences, but possibly criminal charges. Not just the loss of his job, but potentially his freedom. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that the clock was still ticking, that somehow, in the span of just a few minutes, his entire world had been turned upside down. But the revelation that would bring him to his knees was still coming, and it would arrive exactly 2 minutes from now. The summer sun was still beating down on the parking lot, but Officer Mercer felt a chill running through his body. He stood alone now, other officers keeping their distance as if his troubles might somehow be contagious. The crowd had grown to well over 100 people, many filming with their phones, others talking excitedly about what they were witnessing. Local news vans had begun to arrive, reporters setting up equipment preparing to broadcast live. Mercer checked his watch. Just 4 minutes had passed since he'd poured water over Tanya Wilson's head. 4 minutes that had changed everything. "Officer Mercer," called a voice behind him. He turned to see Chief Garcia approaching with a grim expression. "We need to talk." The chief guided him away from the crowd, behind the line of police vehicles where they could speak more privately. Captain Reynolds joined them, along with a man Mercer recognized as Detective Washington from Internal Affairs. "The situation has escalated beyond what you might realize," Chief Garcia began, his voice low but firm. "I've just received word that the FBI Civil Rights Division has been notified and is sending agents to Oak Ridge." Mercer's legs nearly gave out beneath him. "The FBI? For pouring water on someone?" Detective Washington shook his head, a look of disbelief on his face. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about water. It's about a documented pattern of behavior. We've been reviewing your file since the call came in about this incident." He pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what Mercer realized was his personnel file. 13 formal complaints of racial bias and excessive force in 5 years, Washington read. 27 use-of-force incidents, all involving minorities. Traffic stop data showing you pull over Black and Hispanic drivers at 4 times the rate of your peers. Washington swiped to another screen. And this is interesting. 3 of those complaints came from the Wilson family. 1 from Tanya Wilson after you detained her nephew at a traffic stop for 45 minutes without cause. 1 from Dr. Wilson after you blocked the entrance to a health fair she was organizing. And 1 from District Attorney Turner after you arrested a campaign volunteer outside his office during his election campaign. Mercer felt his mouth go dry. He hadn't connected those dots before, hadn't realized all 3 complaints came from the same family. And now that family held positions of significant power in the community. There's more, Captain Reynolds added. We've received multiple calls in the last few minutes from other citizens wanting to file retroactive complaints now that they've seen the video and know something might actually be done, Chief. Garcia stepped closer, lowering his voice. The mayor just called me personally. The city manager is already in talks with the Wilson family's lawyer about a settlement. They're trying to get ahead of what could be a very expensive lawsuit. A lawsuit? Mercer repeated, the word barely making it past his lips. Civil rights violation, assault, harassment, abuse of power, the chief listed. And those are just the obvious charges. Detective Washington wasn't finished. We've also been contacted by the state's Police Standards and Training Council. They're initiating proceedings to revoke your law enforcement certification. The implications hit Mercer like a physical blow. Without certification, he couldn't work as a police officer anywhere in the state. 12 years of service gone, his career over. But there's something else you should know, Chief Garcia said, his expression somehow becoming even more serious. Something about Tanya Wilson that explains why this situation has exploded the way it has. Back near the voter registration tables, Tanya was speaking with a group of community leaders who had arrived after seeing the videos online. Despite attempts to dry off, her clothes were still damp, her hair still bearing the evidence of Officer Mercer's actions. We need to use this moment, she was saying, not just to address one incident with one officer, but to push for the reforms we've been advocating for years. A tall woman in her 60s nodded in agreement. The timing couldn't be more significant, especially with your appointment next week. Andre, who was still recording nearby, perked up at this. Appointment? He asked, moving closer. Tanya smiled, a mix of pride and determination crossing her face. I wasn't planning to announce it until the official press release next Monday. But given today's events, I suppose people will find out soon enough. She straightened her shoulders. Standing tall despite her disheveled appearance, the governor has appointed me as the new state director of criminal justice reform, effective next month. I'll be overseeing the implementation of the police accountability bill that passed last session, including the creation of a civilian oversight board with real power to investigate complaints like the ones against Officer Mercer. A murmur went through the small crowd around her. This explained the governor's personal call, the immediate response from state officials, the media attention that seemed disproportionate even for such a shocking incident. So when that officer poured water on you, Andre began, putting the pieces together. He didn't just assault a private citizen, Tanya confirmed. He assaulted a soon-to-be state official whose entire mandate will be to address exactly the kind of behavior he demonstrated today. Paul Turner, who had been on his phone with colleagues at the DA's office, rejoined the group. And that's not all, he added. Tanya was also recently appointed to the Federal Task Force on Community Policing by the U.S. Attorney General. She's been gathering data on police misconduct across the state for the past 6 months. This revelation sent another wave of shock through those listening. The woman Officer Mercer had tried to intimidate, had assaulted in a moment of unchecked rage, wasn't just any community organizer. She was perhaps the single worst person in the entire state for a police officer to target, someone with both the knowledge and the authority to ensure real consequences. Back behind the police vehicles, Chief Garcia was delivering the same information to Officer Mercer. You assaulted the incoming State Director of Criminal Justice Reform, the chief said, watching the color drain from Mercer's face. A woman who has just spent 6 months gathering evidence of police misconduct for a federal task force and who happens to be married to the district attorney and is the daughter of the county health commissioner. Mercer felt his knees weaken. "I didn't know," he whispered. "That's the point," Captain Reynolds said sharply. "You shouldn't treat anyone the way you treated Ms. Wilson today, regardless of who they are. But the fact that you didn't know, that you just saw a black woman you could bully, that's exactly the problem." Detective Washington's tablet pinged with a notification. He glanced at it, then looked up with an expression that somehow managed to convey both professional detachment and personal disbelief. "The governor's office just issued a statement," he reported. "She's citing today's incident as a prime example of why the police accountability bill was necessary, and she's announcing the acceleration of the Civilian Oversight Board implementation, with Ms. Wilson at the helm." Chief Garcia rubbed his forehead, feeling the beginnings of a migraine. So this incident is now being used to fast-track the very oversight that would prevent incidents like this. "There's more," Washington said, still reading from his tablet. They've announced an audit of our entire department, starting with a review of all complaints filed in the past 10 years. The chief and captain exchanged alarmed glances. An audit would affect everyone, not just Mercer. Past decisions, overlooked complaints, patterns that had been dismissed, all would now face scrutiny. "This isn't just about you anymore," Chief Garcia told Mercer, his voice low with controlled anger. "Your actions today have put the entire department under a microscope. Officers who had nothing to do with this will have their records examined, their decisions questioned." Captain Reynolds, who had been with the department for over 20 years, didn't bother hiding her disgust. "You've just made every officer's job harder. The community trust we've been trying to build for years has been set back by what you did in a few seconds of uncontrolled rage." Mercer leaned against a patrol car for support, the full weight of what he had done finally hitting him. What happens now?" he managed to ask. "Now?" Chief Garcia looked toward the crowd where media presence was growing by the minute. "Now we're all going to face the consequences of your actions." "But you—" He turned back to Mercer, his expression hardening. "You're going to face them first." At that moment, Detective Washington received another notification. He read it, Bentley then looked up at Mercer with something almost like pity in his eyes. "Channel 7 just acquired additional footage," he said quietly. "Security camera video from 3 months ago, showing you using excessive force during an arrest outside a convenience store. They're planning to air it after the segment about today's incident." Mercer felt his world collapse around him. He knew exactly which incident they were referring to. A late-night arrest he thought no one had witnessed, where he'd used far more force than necessary on a young black man who had talked back to him. He'd filed the report claiming resistance, the same excuse he'd used dozens of times before. But apparently there had been a camera. "How did they get that footage?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Anonymous source," Washington replied. "But if I had to guess, I'd say someone in the department has decided it's time for a cleaning of house. Time to stop protecting the bad apples." Mercer's phone vibrated again. This time it was a text from his wife. "The neighbors are outside our house with cameras. Something about reporters coming." "What is happening?" 5 minutes and 30 seconds had passed since he'd poured water on Tanya Wilson's head. 5.5 minutes in which his life had completely unraveled, and the 6th minute was about to begin. As the 6th minute began to tick away, Officer Mercer felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, not physically, but in that way that happens when your entire reality changes in an instant. Everything he thought he knew about his position, his power, his future, was crumbling around him. The voices of Chief Garcia, Captain Reynolds, and Detective Washington seemed to fade into the background as a singular thought consumed him. Survival. Not physical survival, but the survival of everything he had built, his career, his reputation, his family's stability. In 12 years of pushing boundaries, he had always managed to land on his feet. There had to be a way out of this too. "I need to speak with Ms. Wilson," he said suddenly, cutting through whatever the chief had been saying. Chief Garcia looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Absolutely not. You've been suspended and you're not to have any contact with—" "Please," Mercer interrupted, a word that rarely crossed his lips. I need to apologize. Maybe if she hears it directly from me." The 3 senior officers exchanged glances, communicating silently in that way that only people who have worked together for years can do. "That's not going to fix this," Captain Reynolds said finally. You can't undo what's been done with an apology. I have to try, Mercer insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. What do I have to lose at this point? After a moment of consideration, Chief Garcia nodded. Fine. But we go together, and at the first sign that Ms. Wilson is uncomfortable, we walk away. Understood? Mercer nodded quickly, already moving toward where Tanya stood with her family and growing circle of supporters. The crowd parted as they approached, whispers spreading like wildfire, phones raised higher, recording what was about to unfold. Tanya saw them coming and straightened her shoulders, still dignified despite her damp clothes. Her husband moved protectively closer, while her mother's expression hardened. They formed a united front, facing the approaching officers with the quiet confidence of people who knew they held the moral high ground. When they were about 10 feet away, Chief Garcia stopped and gestured for Mercer to do the same. Miss Wilson, the chief called. Officer Mercer has requested to speak with you. You are under no obligation to engage and will respect whatever decision you make. Tanya studied Mercer's face for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. The entire parking lot seemed to hold its breath. I'll hear what he has to say, she decided finally. Then, turning to the crowd, she added, let this be on record too. The implication was clear. Whatever happened next would be just as documented as what had come before. There would be no private conversation, no opportunity for damage control away from the public eye. Mercer stepped forward, suddenly aware of how small he felt without his badge and gun. For the first time in years, he was just a man, not an officer, not an authority figure, just a man who had made a terrible mistake and was now facing the consequences. Ms. Wilson, he began, his voice cracking slightly. I want to apologize for my actions today. There's no excuse for what I did. It was unprofessional and wrong. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears, standard phrases from the department's crisis management training, not a genuine expression of remorse. Tanya clearly heard the emptiness too, her expression unchanged. Is that all? She asked coolly. Mercer swallowed hard. The script he had been mentally preparing wasn't working. Plan A, the formal apology, had failed. Time for Plan B. Look, he said, lowering his voice though still fully aware of the dozens of phones recording his every word. I have a family, a mortgage, a kid starting college next year, 12 years on the force. I made a mistake, a stupid mistake in the heat of the moment. Surely we can find some way to resolve this without destroying my entire life. The plea hung in the air between them. For a brief moment, Mercer thought he saw something like consideration in Tanya's eyes. Then her husband let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Are you actually trying to negotiate right now? Paul Turner asked incredulously. After everything that's happened, you're still trying to find an angle? Mercer's desperation grew. He could feel his future slipping away with each passing second. The 6th minute was almost up, and he had accomplished nothing. In that moment, something broke inside him, the last remnant of the facade he had maintained for years. The tough cop, the authority figure, the man who was always in control, all stripped away to reveal the frightened, desperate person beneath. To the shock of everyone present, Officer James Mercer dropped to his knees on the hot asphalt. Please, he begged, looking up at Tanya. Please don't let them destroy me over one mistake. I have a daughter. She's 16. She wants to be a doctor. I can't lose everything. I can't let her see her father like this. The crowd fell completely silent. No one had expected this. Not the chief, not Captain Reynolds, not the gathered community members, and certainly not Tanya Wilson. The proud, aggressive officer who had red water on her head just 6 minutes ago was now kneeling before her, begging for mercy. Andre Jackson, still recording faithfully, zoomed in on Mercer's face, capturing the tears that had begun to roll down his cheeks. This was no longer about documenting an injustice. It was about witnessing a moment of profound human breakdown. Tanya looked down at the kneeling officer, her expression unreadable. The power dynamic that had defined their interactions for years had been completely reversed. Now she was the one standing tall while he knelt at her feet. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly in the hushed parking lot. 6 minutes ago, she said, you saw me as nothing more than a target for your anger, someone you could humiliate without consequences. You didn't see me as a person deserving of dignity and respect. You certainly didn't see me as someone with the power to hold you accountable. She gestured to the crowd around them. But it's not just me holding you accountable, Officer Mercer. It's all of these people. It's the system that you've manipulated for years. It's the truth that's finally coming to light. Mercer stayed on his knees, his head bowed now. "What can I do?" he whispered. "Just tell me what I can do to fix this." "Fix this?" Tanya repeated thoughtfully. This moment isn't something that can be fixed with an apology or a plea for mercy. This moment is the result of years of unchecked behavior, of complaints ignored, of a system that protected you instead of the people you were sworn to protect. She took a step closer to him. But what happens next? That's where the real work begins. For a moment it seemed she might offer him some path to redemption. Then her expression hardened. "You ask what you can do? You can face the consequences of your actions. All of them. Not just today, but every time you abused your power. Every time you targeted someone because of their skin color. Every time you used excessive force and then lied about it in your report." She glanced at Chief Garcia. "And when the investigators come asking questions about other officers who behaved like you, about supervisors who looked the other way, about a system that allowed you to accumulate 13 complaints with no consequences, you can tell them the truth." Mercer looked up, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "You want me to be accountable," Tanya finished for him. "Not just for your sake or for mine, but for every person who has suffered because of officers like you. For every community that has lost faith in those who are supposed to protect them." She turned to address the crowd, her voice rising. "What happened here today isn't just about one officer or one incident. It's about a system that needs to change, and change starts with accountability." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. People who had come to the grocery store for milk and bread were now witnesses to what felt like a historic moment. Not just the downfall of one officer, but the beginning of something bigger. As the applause died down, Tanya returned her attention to the still kneeling Mercer. "Get up," she said, not unkindly. "Stand on your feet and face what's coming with whatever dignity you have left." Slowly, shakily, Mercer rose to his feet. The man who stood before Tanya now bore little resemblance to the arrogant officer who had approached her table just 6 minutes earlier. His shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed, his expression that of someone who had finally understood the magnitude of not just one action, but of many actions over many years. Chief Garcia stepped forward, placing a hand on Mercer's shoulder. "It's time to go," he said quietly. "The FBI agents will want to speak with you." As they turned to leave, Tanya called after them. "Chief Garcia?" The chief paused, looking back at her. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The Oversight Board will be looking at every complaint, every use of force incident, every traffic stop. Not just Officer Mercer's, but the entire department's. I hope you're ready." Garcia nodded solemnly. "For what it's worth, Ms. Wilson, I welcome it. It's time for change." As Mercer was led away, the crowd began to disperse, the excitement of the moment giving way to reflection on what they had witnessed. Some returned to their shopping, while others lingered at the voter registration table, newly motivated to participate in a system they now believed might actually respond to their voices. Andre Jackson finally lowered his phone, his arm tired from holding it up for so long. He had captured everything, from the moment water cascaded over Tanya's head to the unprecedented sight of Officer Mercer on his knees. What had started as a quick trip to the store had turned into something he would remember for the rest of his life. Tanya returned to the registration table, where her mother waited with a fresh shirt and a proud smile. 6 minutes, Dr. Wilson said, shaking her head in amazement. "From water on your head to that man on his knees. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." Tanya smiled, though there was no joy in it, only determination. 6 minutes to change one man's perspective. But the real work, changing the system, that's going to take a lot longer. She picked up a pen and gestured to the line of people waiting to register. "So let's get started."